You know, when you think of some of your favorite video games, one of the things you probably are thinking about are just how epic some of the boss battles have been in your time. Boss battles are usually something that a lot of gamers look forward to in certain video games more so than others, and it is essentially a wall that stands between the player and their sense of accomplishment or their overall just sense of fun in the game that they're playing. Well, apparently, according to a recent report from Kotaku, it is apparently happening that there is going to become a norm in the industry of skipping boss fights. And this is something that I think every gaming supposed journalist out there would love to see, because we all know that gaming journalists do not actually play video games. These people report on video games and they're given information from the publishers, from the studios, from the developers that are going to look best in their favor, but then they don't actually play the video game most of the time. They never show you their gameplay. They never live stream their gameplay. They never do anything to show you that they're actually playing these video games. And then when they do show you that they're playing the game, you end up with a situation like the Cuphead scenario, where you have journalists who are incapable of even passing the initial tutorial for the game that shows you everything that you need in order to actually pass it. It is such a joke. So in this video, we're going to talk about the overall effect that this is going to have on the gaming industry if skippable boss fights end up becoming the norm, which, to be honest with you, based off recent video games, it seems like this might actually be going this way. You know, we love boss fights. I'm a huge fan of Souls-like video games. Souls-like video games are one of the creme de la creme, in my opinion, in terms of video games, because they are known for their epic boss fights. Elden Ring, Dark Souls, even God of War video games, some of the recent ones have epic boss fights. Cuphead has amazing boss fights as well. But we all see what happens when journalists try to complete games like that. They usually end up falling flat on their face. A recent report by Kotaku says that we could be about to enter a skippable boss fight utopia, because of course a gaming journalist would view this as a utopia. They would love a world where they don't have to actually do any boss fights whatsoever. They would love a world where their challenge is minimal so that they can actually complete these games, or damn near even play these games for that matter. They would love a world like that. They're trying to claim that South to Midnight had shown that it's possible without destroying the very fabric of the universe of which the game takes place. But the hilarious thing is that South to Midnight did terribly, right? South to Midnight performed horribly on Steam, performed horribly everywhere, and ultimately was just one of those Game Pass fodder games because it was a bad game that nobody wanted to take home. Game Pass was being blamed as to why South to Midnight failed, and yet you have Expedition 33 and Oblivion Remake destroying that narrative. It's because nobody wanted to take South to Midnight home. Not many people wanted to actually purchase South to Midnight. That's just a simple fact. No matter how much they may want to fight that, it is true. Now, overall, this is going to set a bad precedent in the gaming industry. It really is, because if you are going to start doing this, where at first it started with accessibility, right? Accessibility was the reason why they started all of this nonsense. They wanted to make it accessible for all players, including potentially disabled players. They also wanted to help people who were struggling and who were non-combat focused gamers into having some form of narrative continuity. They wanted to give you the ability to complete the game even though you might not be very good at combat. They also wanted to reduce player drop-off rates. This was also a huge thing. They figured that if you were able to skip boss fights that were too hard for you, then the chances of the gamer giving up on the video game and having player drop-off rates was going to reduce drastically. All of this was a strategy that they had in terms of developers when coming up with things like skippable boss fights. But the simple fact is, most actual gamers find this to be atrocious. Most actual gamers find this to be absolutely pathetic. And sure, it may not affect them in the grand scheme of things. However, you got to imagine that the gameplay that is going to be throughout the entire game itself is going to be affected by this development ideology. It's very clear that when you are focused on accessibility, everything else tends to take the back burner. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So then you end up having the situation where in South to Midnight, for example, you can in fact skip boss fights. I believe you can completely skip combat in general. Now, for that kind of a game, it's probably not a bad idea considering how terrible and how bland and how just utterly garbage the combat actually is. I remember when I was playing South to Midnight, I specifically stated that if they had taken the combat out of this game and focused on making the platforming better and the exploration better and maybe opening up the maps a little bit, that perhaps we would have a little bit of a better platforming game. But I didn't mean just removing the combat and giving you the same slop that the rest of the game was. It's unfortunate, but that's just what it is. Another video game that is supposedly removing boss fight is going to be Death Stranding 2. Death Stranding 2 apparently is adding all of these amazing combat options that are going to be available in the game. Hideo Kojima is saying that this is going to be essentially a damn near close to Metal Gear Solid with some of the action scenes that are going to be available in the game and some of the epic boss fights in the game. You know, Jeff Keighley over at the Game Awards just posted this crazy thread on Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding 2, showcasing different clips, showcasing different boss fights, and saying that this is going to be one of the biggest games of the year. Because, of course, you know, Hideo Kojima is his friend, in case you didn't know. This is a running joke at this point. Now, in terms of Death Stranding 2, they did announce that you will be able to skip boss battles in Death Stranding 2 after attempting the boss for one try. So if you try the boss and you fail, you'll be able to skip the boss fight after failing. It's insane, man. At this point, you might as well just play a movie, in my opinion. Why would you even want to bother playing a video game that is based around combat, most of the time anyway, that is based around actual boss fights? Why would you even want to play video games like that? There are other video games that will give you the movie-like experience that you are looking for. Hell, even Heavy Rain might be a little bit too difficult for you, even though it's all QTEs. Still, you actually have to play the game. I think what these journalists are looking for is they're looking to be able to watch a 20 to 30 hour movie and just give their thoughts on that movie. That's what it seems like they're looking for. It doesn't seem like they're looking to actually play any video games whatsoever. It's a really sad model, but it seems like it's becoming the norm because, like I said, if a game like Death Stranding 2 is introducing skippable boss fights and a game like South to Midnight has skippable boss fights and there's other video games that are being talked about that are going to have skippable boss fights, we are going to be in for a problem. It is going to be a huge thing in the gaming industry. Things will change drastically for sure. Now, keep in mind, guys, ideas like skippable boss fights did not come out of nowhere. Over the last decade alone, developers have made huge attempts in accessibility. Games like Celeste, for example, included an assist mode, in case you guys were not aware of that. Games like The Last of Us 2 won awards for its comprehensive accessibility settings. Even Elden Ring, which is, you know, infamous for its brutality, and Dark Souls games in general have always had the ability to summon other players in order to try to help you defeat the boss that might be too difficult for you to beat on your own. These are options that have always been available in the video games, but they have inherently added to the video game and not made it feel cheap, right? The summoning mechanic in Dark Souls and in Elden Ring has limitations, and it is not something that is meant to be abused just for the sake of accessibility, which is why people do not mind it. Now, keep in mind, I mentioned earlier in this video that one of the reasons why they wanted to do accessibility features in video games like this is to reduce player drop-off rates, right? There are some developers out there, or one developer in particular said that if someone gets stuck on a boss and quits the game forever, we lose a player. Skipping them lets them keep going. It is a interesting mindset because it's something that I can totally understand from a developer standpoint. They want to keep people playing. They want to keep people invested in the actual game. They want to keep people as long as possible. I get that. But you also have to then understand too that are you making a video game or are you making a movie, right? People are going to say, well, you're still controlling your character, so it still counts as a video game. Yeah, but then you're going to have a video game lose its identity. You're going to have the entire reason for why that game exists start to slowly but surely blend away into obscurity because you really can't tell what you're doing half of the time. Now, obviously, people are divided on this entire conversation around skippable boss fights. Gamers especially are divided. Every player who supports the move as inclusive and empowering, there's another who sees it as a step towards mediocrity. This is something that is always going to continue to be the case. This has been happening for the longest time. I remember back in World of Warcraft days, way back in the beginning during vanilla World of Warcraft, where you had players arguing about casual versus hardcore. This is another version of that argument, just with different talking points, but ultimately it's the same thing. You have more of the casual player who's all for accessibility, people who want things to be a little bit easier to respect their time, versus people who are hardcore gamers that whether or not they have jobs or not doesn't matter because they want to boot up a game and be challenged. That's the entire reason why they're playing the game. They want there to be some sort of challenge. Now, some people can handle higher challenge versus other people, they can handle lower challenge, but they still want to be challenged. They don't want to just sit there and play a movie. Otherwise, they would just watch a movie. But again, it's basically like if you had, I'll give you an example. If you had a horror movie, imagine a horror movie where you could skip all of the scary scenes in the horror movie. Is it still a horror movie? Or is it not? You know what I mean? That's kind of how I see games that have boss battles allowing you to skip them. It doesn't quite make sense. But again, you're also going to have other people who are going to be like, well, I have a life, right? I have a life and I can't get good at games like Elden Ring, but I still want to play because everybody else is playing. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But again, I get people's arguments between the two, and they're going to have two opposing sides. So let's talk about this from a game design standpoint. This is where it becomes more of an issue for me personally, because then I start to worry about the overall effect that this kind of decision will have on game design, right? This raises deeper questions about the overall design, because bosses are not just regular enemies. They're essentially pacing tools, right? They keep the player engaged, and they offer skill checks that will determine whether or not you can move to the next part of the game. There are also narrative milestones, mechanic testers, all kinds of things. If players can opt out of this, then how do the developers end up building all of those things that are required by fighting this boss fight? How do you build tension? How do you do reward growth? How do you actually teach the mechanics in the game? I'll give you another example. Imagine Shadow of the Colossus, but you remove the Colossi. What are you going to do there? Imagine Metal Gear Solid without its boss fights. Imagine that. Imagine Cuphead. Cuphead's entire gameplay design is literally all boss fights. If you could skip every boss fight in Cuphead, what are you doing in Cuphead? All of this makes sense when you start talking about it. It's so dumb. But then again, designers might start building boss fights with less effort because they don't want to make them as difficult. And this is where accessibility can bleed into actual overall game design and affect it in a negative way. So when people say, oh, but it doesn't affect you, let it be known that it absolutely does affect you. It's only a matter of time. Developers will start to let that bleed over, and then the lines between difficulty and accessibility will begin to blur. Then you're going to have all the woke people out there that are going to talk about the fact that, oh, it's not just about difficulty, it's about equity, it's about equality, right? They're going to advocate and argue against the difficulty, which often intersects with the ability in offering ways that creates more fair experiences and not less. You know, it's one of those things where not everything has to be fair when it comes to gaming. Not everything has to be equitable. Not everything has to have equality. This is not something that has to be demanded in the gaming industry, right? There are different video game genres for a reason. If you don't like horror games, don't play horror games. Don't boot up and buy a horror game and then demand that all the scary scenes get removed in order to placate to you. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Don't buy a game like Elden Ring and demand there be an option to skip boss fights. Don't buy a game like Cuphead and then demand for an option to skip boss fights. That makes no fucking sense whatsoever. So the overall tone in the gaming industry will in fact change if something like this goes down. If skippable boss fights become the norm, the industry honestly may shift its priorities overall to just making more accessible gameplay and not even worrying about whether or not you can turn it on or off. You know, narrative focused studios, for example, could build smoother pipelines where player agency is reduced in favor of momentum. Action RPGs might rely on upgrades and cosmetics instead of mastery of the actual gameplay and the game itself. Imagine if you had the ability to skip boss fights in the first Berserker Kazan, right? This game I absolutely love. I love this game. I'm currently reviewing it right now on Hypnotic Live, and I am near completion of all the side content and all the main content. And I can literally watch me from the beginning and all the way to where I'm at now, and the progression in my skill and how I was able to master the game little by little. That's only possible if you're actually able to do the boss fights. That's only possible if you're actually able to play the game the way that it was intended. My biggest issue is the people like Kotaku, you know, the journalists like John Walker. They want to make this a thing because they don't want to simply get good. As much as that is the age-old meme, that still stands the test of time even till today. You know, he even said something like this: in a gaming world increasingly built out of Souls-likes, where the concept of the boss battle becomes a central game mechanic, some of us have been left behind. I have always hated boss fights, and while I have no interest in convincing anyone else to agree with me, I have long lamented the lack of accommodation made for the many other people who are already with me. But sniff the air, something's changing. Bro, If you don't like boss fights, why are you worried about being left behind in games like Elden Ring or Souls-like video games? It's very clear that those games were not made for you. So because they're not made for you, why do you want to have the ability to skip boss fights for people who the game is made for, right? If people are going to buy an Elden Ring game, then that simply means that they are looking for that kind of content. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people out there that have purchased games like Elden Ring, for example, that didn't know exactly what they were buying. They just heard it through the grapevine that Elden Ring is the next hot thing, right? Elden Ring made the Souls franchise more mainstream than ever, more than any other video game they've ever released, and it really brought itself to the forefront of a lot of players' eyes that weren't necessarily used to Souls-like video games. So now they found out about Elden Ring and they're like, oh, this sounds cool. Everybody's playing it. Let me go buy it. And they were open for a rude awakening. So then the Kotaku journalist says, I recently loaded South at Midnight, interested to check out such gorgeous looking game, and was immediately delighted by the art and the extraordinary performances in the cutscenes. But then, as Zach warned us, I was immediately underwhelmed by the repetitive combat. However, while idly fiddling through the game settings to see what that was, I saw a toggle I absolutely was not expecting. Boss skip option. I'm sure as a journalist, the moment he saw that there was a boss skip option in the game, he probably lost his mind. He was like, yes, that means I can actually review this game and not be stressed out. It's so sad that we are at a point in gaming where a boss skip option gets people excited, right? And by people, I mean the journalists. They're the only ones who get excited over this stuff. It's true. It's really kind of sad. In 2017, he says he wrote one of the most controversial articles of his career, and apparently it led to literal death threats, according to him, alongside hundreds of more banal insults and wishes for my imminent demise. As someone who battled hardened by Gamergate, oh, now we're bringing up Gamergate. So this is what they do, bro. These people are not video game, like they're not gamers, man. I cannot stand these journalists that are constantly trying to bring up Gamergate still to this day. Like they supposedly say they're battle hardened, but you're so battle hardened that you can't handle a boss fight without getting stressed out. That's how battle hardened you are by Gamergate. Sure, I guess I'll believe that. But anyway, he continues, it takes quite a bit for the scale of backlash to take me by surprise. And while I knew it would piss off some people, I didn't predict the volume. I wrote an article suggesting that boss fights should be skippable. Imagine my temerity. There are so many games I've never seen the end of, but for YouTube, I suppose, because I wasn't physically capable of completing later boss fights. I've never finished a Metroid Prime game. Oh my God. For instance, despite it being one of my all-time favorite gaming series, there are other games I've been enjoying so far so much, but just had to abandon because every so often there would be a difficulty spike of such enormous disproportion that eventually I lose all will to try. And to be abundantly clear, this isn't just about my incompetence. There are obviously a billion boss fights I've successfully completed, but almost none I've even vaguely enjoyed. For me and millions of others, there are mostly tedious obstacles that get in the way of enjoying the rest of the game. This person is speaking like absolute nonsense. I hope you guys understand that. This Kotaku journalist is trying to take his worldview and pass it off on everybody else. He's trying to say, oh yeah, there's millions of others just like, no, there isn't. No, there isn't. The numbers do not support that. They do not substantiate that. It is very clear by the numbers of the games and the sales themselves that plenty of people want this product that you are currently trying to neuter in order to fit your incompetence. You talk about your incompetence as if it's not a bad thing, but in all actuality, it is. So then he says, it struck me. Why not just let me skip past them? Who loses out? Everybody. They may not lose out in that game, but when the developers make their next game, you bet your ass they're going to make it more accessible naturally instead of leaving it optional like they currently had in the current game. Well, it just turns out that the answer to the question is 2017 was very angry people. For reasons never quite comprehensively elucidated, my being able to carry on playing a game I like without finishing a specific fight causes them great personal injury. To skip over a boss, I was told, both a moral and physical affront, and the addition of such an option will very likely destroy video games, if not all of society. You know, this person is trying to pass off, he's trying to be a passive aggressive, but here's the best analogy that I could possibly give. So you complaining about other people who had to go through boss fights in order to complete the game and who spent the time in getting good in order to complete the game, and here you are with a get out of jail free card and trying to enjoy the same benefits as everybody else who busted their ass to get to where they are. This is no different than the socialist mindset, which again, I'm not surprised considering it's a Kotaku journalist. They probably are socialist mentally. This is equivalent to someone who works their ass off for a promotion, works their ass off for their career, works hard for their money, and here you are demanding more money from the government and from welfare and hoping that you can have equal pay to everybody else who actually works. This is the same exact scenario. And this is why people who do go through boss fights and actually learn to get good at the game, this is why they don't like people like you, because you're trying to get the same benefits and get all the way to the end of the game without doing anything in order to get to the end of the game. You basically want to watch a movie. But he says, and yet a month since South of Midnight release, I have yet to witness the collapse of humanity. In fact, I've only heard very few people talking about it. This is not the very first time a game has offered a way past tough spots. A fair few big name games have options to let you skip entire missions should you fail them enough. Red Dead Redemption 2 and Days Gone, for instance, while many others will offer to lower the difficulty if you're flailing, but it's still vanishingly rare, and South of Midnight is the only instance of specifically being able to skip the bosses that I'm aware of. Let me know of other examples. Well, the only example I really have right now would be Death Stranding 2, which is not out yet, so I guess that doesn't count. Overall, this entire story about skipping boss fights is going to lead to a situation where the gaming industry is absolutely going to be affected by this. This is going to create a major issue where developers are going to start seeing this narrative be spun about people wanting the option for boss fights to be skippable, and before you know it, they're just going to start designing their games to be easier, and that's going to lead to very boring games. The reason why I didn't like the combat in South of Midnight is because it was boring, it was bland, it was safe, it was very safe, there was nothing about it that was challenging whatsoever. It was one of the easiest combat systems I have ever experienced, and yet this person wants to skip that? If they want to skip that, I can only imagine what they want to skip in the future. So at the end of the day, maybe it's not about what the game should offer, but about what kind of gamers we want to be. Do we actually value the journey? Do we value the actual gameplay? Do we value the boss fights? Or is it just about getting from point A to point Z? I am sure for the journalists, it's about getting point A to point Z, because that way they can write their review and put their articles out faster. But most gamers are not going to accept that, and most gamers don't want that, myself included. So I hope that this does not continue to be the norm. I hope that this does not run over into the gaming industry and the philosophy of design. And I would love to know, what's your take? Should games offer skippable boss fights as a standard feature, or are we opening the door to absolute nonsense that we will not be able to ever close once it's open? You could drop your thoughts in the comments down below. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Special shout out to my members over at the Bigot Army. Thank you guys so much for your insane support, and I will see you on the next one. Hypnotic out.